All right, if you can hear my voice wherever you're at, whether you're sitting over here, if you can hear the sound of my voice, I need you to just take a moment with me. It's Sunday night, and I'm blessed to be here, first of all. Thanks to Drew and everybody over here. Thanks to Steven, thanks to Sarah, thanks to everybody. Just give a round of applause to everybody who makes Envision happen. I mean, this is such a beautiful experience for all of us. And now I finally get to fulfill my purpose. And what I mean by that is I came here to share and to speak and to learn. And so despite all the fun partying and the beach and connections and everything throughout the weekend, this is why I'm here. So I appreciate you guys joining me for a moment. But before we get started and I share a little bit more about what I'm going to be talking about, as Drew said, the talk is titled The Path to Decentralization and Community Healing. It's alternatively titled The Sevenfold Path of the Holistic Activist or the Holistic Anarchist. And I'm going to describe all these concepts to you, some big ideas. I spoke about this last year. Some of you may have seen that or heard that. And we're going to do a little bit deeper dive. I'm with you for an hour, so we get to expand on these topics. But before we do that, as I said, I want us to kind of reach down into that primal nature inside all of us and just think of all the experiences you've had this weekend over the last 4 or 5 days, however long you've been out here, and whatever you're doing afterwards. Just think about all the people you've met, the fun you had on the beach, the amazing good food, and just everything you've been doing. Tap into that space for a moment, and I want us to take a deep breath, and we're just going to release that and make sure that everybody in this jungle can hear you and can feel you, right? I like to howl. That's the way I express myself, so feel free to howl, but whatever sounds and things come out of you are welcome as well. So let's take a nice deep breath together. Release. I always feel better after a howl. I think it just calms me down a little bit. And a good way to celebrate as well. So I appreciate you guys being here, tuned in for this moment, and I know we'll get some more brothers and sisters to come join in this conversation, because this truly is a conversation. And as I said, I have a lot of big ideas to go over. We did have a slide thing going on here, but it's not really necessary. I think I can break it down without pictures, although pictures are helpful. I know that I'm talking to many of you who might not have heard of my work. My name is Derrick Broze, and in the regular world, I wear a few different hats, labels: journalist, author, public speaker, activist. I'm based in Houston, Texas. Do a lot of different things. I have a YouTube channel and a website promoting both awareness to governmental and political corruption through my journalism, as well as highlighting indigenous struggles, and through my books and through my speaking, talking about the solutions, the philosophy behind this. And my goal really with my work is to try to expose people to the darkness and some of the crazier things going on in our world, and then lead them to ask, well, what can we do about it? And then present some of those ideas. So I've been doing this for a number of years, and I want to give you guys just a little bit of background on how I got to here today in Envision before we go into what I call holistic activism. And we're going to define these terms, holistic and anarchism. And the interesting thing about combining both these terms, which is what I've been calling my message more recently, is I think that those two words, holistic and anarchism, are probably the most misunderstood and misused words in a lot of different ways. And so we'll talk about that as well. But just again, a little bit of background. So I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Houston, Texas. And this is the short version in the interest of time. I've been, as I said, plugging away with activism and journalism for the last 8 years. I started to have my kind of awakening to the political world, to the corruption of the world about 2010, and started to dive down various rabbit holes, and that led me to creating an activist community, an activist alliance called the Houston Freethinkers, and living in a number of community spaces and launching and building community gardens, hosting benefit shows and music festivals, and just building community, and trying to give people an understanding that the solutions, the tools that we're looking for, I fully believe all of the tools we're looking for are already within our own communities. It's just about bridging those gaps and making those connections. So I had a great experience, and it's been a wonderful experience over those years, and started to get into just exploring these concepts, and that led to writing some books and getting asked to speak places, and here I am. But before that, before I ever started to question the political or corporate nature of our world and what are these institutions really about? Do they actually care about us? Is there something we can do about it? Starting to ask these deeper questions, and to ask, what are those institutions? What is a corporation? What is a government? And explore these ideas. Way before I got into that, I was actually addicted to crystal meth. In 2005, which is almost 15 years ago, the week before I turned 21, I got arrested. I was selling crystal meth, and I'd been addicted to it for about 10 or 11 months. And I found myself locked up, and I went to prison. And that was, one of those major shifts in my life, getting locked up. And that prison experience, going to prison in November 2005, that was preceded by about 3 years of just bouncing from one addiction to the other. Got out of high school after spending most of my early early childhood and my teenage years very depressed. I grew up visiting my birth father in prison quite often, and him making promises about returning home and being there for various holidays or important events, and those things not coming true. And as a young child, without the tools, without the emotional literacy to really understand how to navigate what I was feeling, I just became extremely depressed as a young kid. I attempted to kill myself 3 times before I turned 18. And so by the time I got out of high school, I just started drinking all the time. And then I was the dude who was puking all over the place after 23 beer bongs or 20 shots or something else ridiculous. And I did that for about 6 months. And then I was the guy who was all barred out on Xanax, falling all over the place and not remembering how I got there and waking up in jail, and did that thing for a little while. And then I was the guy who was on ecstasy all the time, who was just rolling 3 or 4 times a week until I turned into a zombie. And just was cycling through, one of these things after another, and then eventually crystal meth found its way in my path, and I was just I've always been kind of the person that just dives in, like, sure, let's see what happens. And within 10 months, lost my job, lost my apartment, and ended up living on the streets and living in a crack meth house, and just got really sucked into this whole drug world, and really, it truly shaped where I'm at today. So once I realized that wasn't the path that I was on, that I wanted, and that the answers I'd been seeking, ultimately now I realized the love that I was seeking, the love that I had seeking from the lack of relationship I had with my birth father, and from growing up in a family where the males on both sides of my family, at least going back 3 generations, have dealt with drug addiction, alcohol abuse, prison. It's something that's very prevalent, and up till when I got locked up and I was able to look back from a clear head, a sober mind, and really just with the space and the time. Prison was not the ideal situation for me to start having self-reflection, but once you're looking at the calendar and you realize, wow, I'm not going home for at least another year, like, you're given a choice. You're gonna just sit there and cry about it every day, or you're just gonna think about the free world all the time. All that does is slow your time down, extremely slow. Or choose to do something with that time, and that's what I started to do. So I started to journal every day. Was one of the first things that I did, and to ask myself, how did I get here? After being angry at this guy my whole life for his drug problem and feeling like he chose drugs over me, how did I find myself now in prison for the same thing? And then seeing that, wow, there's this intergenerational trauma specifically in my family on both sides that has led the men to be addicted to drugs, be addicted to alcohol, to go to prison, suicide attempts. I could see it very clearly. And then one day while I was locked up, I read the newspaper all the time, and at the Houston Chronicle, on the Saturday section, they have a religion section where they quote from different traditions. They have quotes from the Bible, from the Torah, the Quran, and they had a quote from the Dhammapada, which is sometimes known as the Buddhist Bible, and it was just a verse from the Buddha that struck me so deeply, and I don't recall what it was, but it was something that as soon as I read it, I just felt like I needed to know more. And so my grandmother started sending me a chapter of the Dhammapada a day, just through the mail, just printing it out, and then sent me some books on meditation, specifically Zazen, Zen meditation. And I started meditating while I was in prison, along with journaling, and really doing this introspective work and asking these questions. And so when it was all said and done, between 2005 and 2008, I did 18 months in Texas state prisons and got out as a felon in late 2008. And as I said, I felt like this cloud had been lifting up off me, like not only the cloud of the drugs, but the cloud of depression that I'd been feeling most of my life, and putting all this self-blame on myself, on me, and thinking that all these things were my doing, or maybe there was something wrong with me, and just all these types of insecurities that I think we all deal with, and that express themselves differently for each of us depending on your particular path. And I got out now as a felon, came back into the world, and as I said, I started to just ask these various questions. I was at the library all the time trying to apply for jobs, because when I came out, I had the new experience of being judged as a felon. Oh, you can't work here, you can't, rent here, we don't want you here. These just, all the kinds of judgments that come along with that type of world, where you're locking people up in a cage for their use of plants or for really anything. I don't think, even though I was addicted to crystal meth, I think that all drugs should be decriminalized, because what people really need is treatment. I know that that's what I really needed. I needed somebody to talk to at the end of the day, not to be thrown in a cage with other people who were also brilliant and who were suffering in their own ways, right? I met so many great people. I met so many people in there, some of them who figured it out before I did, some of them are dead, some of them are still cycling in and out, and a few of us have kind of carved the path that I'm on. So when I got out, I started to read about the drug war itself, and I read a few books that just kind of opened my mind. I was like, wow, I just got through being locked up for drugs, and I'd never heard this version of events. This is not what I was taught in high school, and that was the beginning of going down those rabbit holes. And as I said, slowly got into waking up to politics, and to what are government, what are corporations, and asking those questions, and getting into community activism, and yada, yada, yada. Here I am today. So the reason I share all that is, well, just so you know a little more where I'm coming from, but also because that experience completely underpins the message that I'm about to share with you guys. So my book series and my website, and what I was calling it before, is The Conscious Resistance. And when that phrase came to me in 2013, I'd been spending my life living a double life for a couple of years. After I got out of prison, I started to continue my interest in meditation and kind of running in consciousness communities and spiritual circles. And then I started to get into activism and going to protests and working with various groups. And essentially what I realized was, when I was around my activist friends, I could talk all day about environmental destruction or the police state or surveillance or whatever issues I was concerned with. But the moment I said, hey guys, y'all want to come join me at this meditation, or something weird like, hey, have you ever thought maybe we're all God? Maybe we're just like reflecting, or I just say something weird, right? And they're like, are you high? What are you talking about? They showed no interest in those sort of deeper realms. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Then I would be in my spiritual consciousness circles, and we'd be doing our meditations or ecstatic dances or whatever. And I'd say, holy shit, guys, have you seen what they're doing with this pipeline? Have you seen what the police are doing? Have you seen this? And it was like, don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. You're going to manifest it. Just keep it quiet. And so I did that. I was like, okay, I guess this is just how I have to live. I'm gonna have this circles and I'll have this circles. And I did that for a couple years until the summer of 2013, and that's when the phrase, the conscious resistance, came to me. And what I mean by that, it's the recognition, the realization, the awareness that the struggle for a more free and ethical world is not going to come from only confronting the physical institutions of power, be that government, corporations, or what have you. And it's also not gonna come from simply meditating and working on our internal trauma. It's a combination of these two things, and to me, there's no separating these things. The more I work on healing my own trauma, like I was talking about going through depression and suicide and drugs and all that, I recognize that, you know, if you had come to me at that point in my life and shared, like if I met myself back then and I said, dude, do you know what the heck's going on in the world? And I shared all this information, I would have heard, I would have listened, and I would have even been like, holy shit, that's really happening. But I wouldn't have been able to do anything about it because I was just trying not to kill myself that day. I was just trying to get through my own trauma, right? And so when I started to work through that and I got out of prison and started to question these things, I realized that there are so many other brothers and sisters who are also suffering in their internal trauma and lost in their own emotional muck, and that until they're able to have the tools, and each of us choose different modalities and different ways towards healing, but until you start that journey, it's very difficult to care or to do anything about the outside world, the external world, right? But at the same time, if you're constantly just focusing on the external world and ignoring your own internal world, you're gonna get burnt out really quickly. And also, I think you're gonna be coming from a place of maybe misdirected emotion and rage, as opposed to an awareness that there is a state of nature that exists, but there are also things we can do about it, right? So it's not about just simply being apathetic and saying, all I have to do is just think about the world I want 10 times a day and it's going to happen. Others may disagree, but for me, it's the becoming spiritually aware as well as aware of the physical manifestations of power is a truly empowering thing. And that's what the conscious resistance is about. And more recently, as I said, I've been calling this holistic activism and holistic anarchism. And when I think of what the conscious resistance is and what this message is, to me it's really about, you could see it in one way as balancing the feminine and masculine energies, or balancing the physical and the emotional or spiritual, right? Trying to find balance in both of those worlds. Now, as I said earlier, holistic and anarchism, two of the most misunderstood and overused, misused terms all the time, like I think probably anywhere. Let's start with holistic. Holistic, I've seen everything from holistic sex, holistic gardening, holistic cat food, holistic, I mean, you name it, it's out there, right? But I want to tell you guys something. Holistic is an actual word with the definition, and that definition means something. Sometimes I realize that we use words, we might not necessarily have a clear understanding of what they mean. We've got a feeling associated with it, but the definition of holistic, it comes from the philosophy of holism, and holism is about studying entire systems as opposed to breaking them down into individual components. You study the whole system, and what this does is changes not only the outcomes of the way you view something, but also just it changes your perspective of it in general. So a couple examples. The most clear example many of you are probably familiar with, holistic medicine, is the idea of studying the whole body as opposed to simply just treating the symptom, right? Kind of reacting and treating the symptom. Instead, you study the whole thing. Holistic psychology, similar concept. Holistic ecology, studying the whole planet and all the systems, both animals, human, environment, all the different systems as one, as opposed to breaking them down into individual components. So it's just another way to study any field of research. And so when I talk about holistic activism, what I mean by that is when people think of activism, now for me, activism is everything. Activism is a way of life, and I think that we're all activists. Some of us may choose to be more active activists, but I think that actually activism, the evolution, it's in the conversations, it's in your day-to-day actions. You know, I like to say that I vote all the time. I don't vote in the political world because I don't condone violence and play that game, but I vote every single day with my actions, by the way I engage with other people, by where I spend my money, by the type of systems I support, and by what I'm building in my community, right? So that is taking a more holistic approach with activism as opposed to being reactionary in your activism, right? So most people, when they think of activism, they think of somebody holding a sign or chanting or, you know, marching on the streets, and that is definitely a part of activism. However, most of that tends to be reactionary. So they're building a pipeline over here, so let's all fly across the country and go, you know, react to that and protest that, or, you know, this is happening here. The other side is controlling the game. They're controlling the energy and the flow of where we're going, as opposed to us saying, okay, here's a problem. Like, let's start with Monsanto, right? A few years ago, who's heard of the March Against Monsanto? It was a really big movement several years ago, right? And this movement was centered around exposing the crimes of Monsanto, asking questions about GMOs and trying to save the bees, and, you know, looking at pesticides, a lot of interrelated topics. And it started out really big, where you had 500 cities around the world marching and protesting. Then by year 2, it's 300 cities. By year 3, maybe 150 cities. By year 4, I don't even know if anybody showed up, because those type of movements tend to take a lot of energy to sustain themselves and typically can't sustain it. So let me give you an example of this, the holistic approach versus a reactionary approach. In Houston, the March Against Monsanto Houston said that they wanted to organize a march that would take place where all the popular marches in Houston happen, near this mall where there's a lot of foot traffic. So they plan to show up there and march around in a circle for 3 hours and you know, chant and do things like that. So the Houston Freethinkers, we said, hey, let's partner with you guys, but once the march is over, let's go over to the last organic outpost, which was this really beautiful, awesome permaculture farm in one of the poorest neighborhoods of Houston, and let's do a workshop and teach everybody here how to grow their food, right? Because that probably is the solution we're looking for, right? Let's actually, again, be proactive. It probably wouldn't surprise you guys, and again, this is the problem, that there were 500 plus people at the march and less than a handful that showed up at the garden afterwards, right? So, you know, less than 1% probably showed up to actually do something proactive to see the solution. They weren't thinking holistically. They identified the problem, Monsanto, GMOs, pesticides, and they point their finger, they build up a worldview of who they hold responsible, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Trumps, the Clintons, whoever, whatever, you know, people that come to your mind. But that's usually where they stop. They don't turn around and point their finger back at themselves and say, how am I contributing to this problem? What role am I playing, right? So if you're marching against Monsanto, or you're raising awareness of the problems with pesticides, but in your diet, you're supporting companies that use Monsanto's products, or you're buying food that has been sprayed with pesticides that are coming from that same industry, then you can see how you're actually working against yourself. Or at the very least, you're keeping yourself from advancing the goal, right? Maybe the march spreads awareness, it feels good to get out there and express yourself, but at the end of the day, have you moved the ball any closer to having pesticide-free food, having sustainable, organic, community, localized, decentralized food production systems? So that's the difference between thinking holistically and more of a reactionary form of activism. Do you guys get where I'm going with that? Does that make sense? Cool. All right, now anarchism. Anarchism, this will be more brief, and then we'll get into what I call the sevenfold path of the holistic activist, holistic anarchist. Anarchism simply means that you respect every other free human being's ability to live and breathe as they choose, so long as they are not imposing their will on any other being, so long as they are not initiating force or violence or coercion against you and on your life. So think about what's taking place around here. There's all kinds of people from all over the world, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, sexual orientations, musical interests, food interests, but the vegans aren't killing the meat eaters, and you know, there's no chaos happening here. This is true spontaneous order. I'll tell you a secret. This is anarchism. There's no centralized leader in here. Yes, we've got the crew that are kind of running things, and we got volunteers making sure things flow, but at the end of the day, there's no centralized authoritarian system telling us how we should live our lives and imposing its will upon us. And I hate to say it, but at the end of the day, institutions that are centralized, like government and corporations, are nothing but violence and force and coercion that has been imposed upon our will. And I think it's more accurate to see them as essentially just a different type of cartel. If you understand what drug cartels are, governments are simply really just another form of cartel that over generations have conditioned people to believe they're the best that we can do. And it's no longer a king on the throne, it's a democratically elected government that, whether you like it or not, well, it's the will of the people. I think that these concepts need to be called into question. And so I don't wave the anarchist flag. Like, I don't really care if you guys use that label per se, but I just want to be clear of where I'm coming from. So the solutions I seek are not governmental, they're decentralized, they're localized, they're grassroots, ground up, bottom-up solutions. That's the kind of solutions that I'm after, right? So when you put that together, a holistic anarchist, what does that mean? In my perspective, a lot of the activists, a lot of the organizers, a lot of the anarchists I've worked with are hyper-focused on either economics, government, politics, maybe logic, because many people come to these conclusions through a very logical mindset. On the spiritual side, it's more emotion, intuition, but sometimes when it comes to anarchism, people are coming from like a logical perspective, like, yeah, it doesn't make sense. Why would we have these governments or these corporations or central bodies over us? It doesn't make sense. I own myself, thereby government is BS, right? So when you're coming from that mindset, it's often difficult to get people to step out of that, and I've noticed that, and so I started to try to, again, preach the holistic aspect. So you may understand political philosophy like the backside of your hand and know what Trump's up to every day or what Maduro's up to every day or what these political world leaders are up to, but maybe in your own interpersonal relationships, you treat other people like shit. Or maybe your diet is contributing to problems in the world. Or maybe the job that you have, the type of money that you use. I'm very big into alternative currencies and trying to pursue whatever they may be, paper, digital, etc. So my point here is that it's not just about what are the politicians up to or what are the corporations up to, but examining all areas of your life. My shirts are right there, and on there's a holistic anarchist symbol, and it's basically an A with like these little vectors that represent different areas of your life. So one could be relationships, one could be economics, one could be health, food, one could be, just you start breaking that down for yourself and examining what I call the holistic self-assessment, so that you as an individual can say, okay, these are my goals. I want to live on a organic farm, permaculture community, and I have this vision, off-grid, family, all these great things. But then when you look at your daily actions and your habits, you might realize, holy crap, I haven't even taken the step to research that or even to Google what is permaculture or to research any of these terms, right? So you see a disconnect between your goals, your ambitions, and your actions. And I'm very much about consistency and trying to get us to align thoughts, words, and actions. That's the only way we're going to be able to move forward. And the only way I truly believe we will have a movement that can take advantage of all this beautiful energy here is if we're thinking holistically as we move forward and not just focus on what are they up to, right? But what can we do? What can we do, right? Who here came for solutions? Came here to hear ideas, right? Not just, I want to really hit this point home before we get to the sevenfold path. I'm so blessed and so honored to have friends like Stephen Brooks and, who's heard Stephen speak? Stephen's amazing, right? He's up next after me, so hang around. But I met Stephen a couple years ago and connected with Sarah and Drew and have been invited to speak here a couple times now. And I get invited to speak at a lot of different beautiful places around the world and different events. And I love it. But I didn't get into any of these things. I told you guys my story of all the things I went through. I never stopped and thought, okay, well, maybe if I just start being an activist after a couple years, I'll write some books and then people will invite me to speak in Costa Rica. Okay, yeah, that sounds like a plan. All of these things just came. I just trust and walked through the doors, and I never got into this to get invited to speak to places. So at the end of the day, if this is all just a big party and we're just here to pat each other on the back and feel like, yeah, we're the more conscious ones who could afford to come here down in Costa Rica and hang out for 4 days, we're better than everybody else back at home, then this is all just a big party, and let's be real about it, right? But if you actually came here for solutions, and if you actually came here to take the energy and the conversations and the knowledge that you're learning here and go home with it and have that fire, then we can change the fucking world, dude, seriously. And that's the only way we will change the world. If we go home on Monday and Tuesday and wherever else you're going, wherever home is at, wherever the road leads you, if we go home and we're right back to the same old thing we did before, then don't be surprised if you're here at next year's Envision and we're talking about the same problems, but they'll probably be much worse. So that's the reality we're in, right? There's no quick fix. There's no quick fix. There's no start a violent revolution and things will get fixed. We've done that throughout history. There's always somebody ready to take over the throne and re-implement the same game. And there's no vote for a new person and everything's gonna get fixed. I hate to break it to you, I'm sorry, but that's not, those are two lies that we're told, that there are quick fixes. This is a long, you've heard of the 7 generations. We have to think in terms of 7 generations. So the change that I'm talking about is a multi-generational change. It starts with the way that that we start living our lives, the way that we raise our children, the way we communicate to ourselves, the way we communicate with our families and our friends, if we choose to be the ones today to start adopting new ideas, and we're about to get into that, and start implementing change on a decentralized local level, we can be the ones that helped lay the foundation for the future. We might not live to see it, but we can make the world much easier for those who are to come after us, for your children and your grandchildren and the ones that we will never meet, the 7 generations and beyond. That's the change I'm thinking of, okay? So if I describe things that seem a bit daunting, please don't be afraid. There are steps you can take. So let's get into the 7-fold path of the holistic anarchist. Now these steps that I'm basically offering, the visual was just a meditating person sitting there with the chakra system lit up as a guide. And so what I'm going to do is, for each chakra as we go up, we're going to talk about a step that you can take in the spiritual, emotional realm towards more freedom, more empowerment, more abundance, and then we're going to counterbalance that with something you can do in the physical realm, right? And so we're just going to go back and forth till we're all the way up to the pineal gland, and then we're just flying. All right, so let's do that. Let's get into that. You guys with me? You guys out there having a good time? Cool, thank you. I still got about 30 minutes. Cool, this is so much better. When I did this 2 weeks ago and it was in 30 minutes and I just was rushing the whole time, and it feels better to breathe. Let's breathe together. All right, let's do it. 7-fold path of the holistic anarchist. So we're going to start with the spiritual, emotional side, and mindfulness. Mindfulness. This is the first component that I would say in that area. Now, what does that mean? What does that entail? Mindfulness is also often sometimes known as mindful awareness, is another way to put it, right? And this is just that essential basic step. I'll bring you back to my story of going to prison and discovering meditation. Until I got to that space and I had this quiet space where I'm on the payphone like, come on, Mom, figure out a way to get me out of here, please, please, please. And then the judge says, nope, he's got to stay there, and and you have to accept. I think this is a really powerful thing for, you ever been in a situation where you realize you are truly powerless? Like there's nothing you can do. You can't call Mom, can't call Dad, can't call like girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. You're dealing with it, one way or the other, right? And that's the situation. You're locked in a place where these people don't care who you are, what you have to say, or they're gonna treat you just the same as everybody else in there, which is basically like dirt. And that feeling though, and realizing that by focusing and trying to think, well, maybe they're gonna figure a way to get me out of here and I won't have to, I was fighting it. And of course I didn't want to be in prison. And once I chose to like accept it, time started to flow. Because when you're holding on to the outside world, everything just slows down. You're constantly thinking about what's your significant other to, what are your friends up to, your job or your money, just whatever. You're not present. And so even though you don't want to be present in this place that's filled with fear and anger and a lot of judgment and insecurity, it was probably the most important, most powerful place for me to start my journey into mindfulness. And now, since then, I've realized that there actually are a growing number of meditation programs in prisons, which is really beautiful to see. And I definitely would be interested in being involved in something like that. So mindfulness, it has to start there, right? If we're not aware of who we are, we don't start asking ourselves that question of who am I, right? And digging deeper, then it's very difficult to go beyond that. My most recent book, I mentioned the holistic self-assessment. The first question in that book, each chapter asks you a real general kind of question, and then each chapter ends with a simple exercise. The first question is, who am I? Who am I, right? I want you guys to just think about that for a moment as we're talking about the mindfulness aspect. Who am I? I mean, obviously it's like a very big, broad question, but just shout out some things. What comes to mind when somebody says, who are you? Or ask yourself that, anybody.
Unlimited.
Unlimited.
Confident.
Confident.
Fierce.
Fierce. Okay, so we're describing characteristics of attributes that we feel, but is that who you are though? Think about how difficult this question is once you start digging into it. Because you can say, oh, well, I'm a journalist. Yeah, but that's a label you got on yourself. Oh, well, I'm a good person. Okay, maybe that's getting closer to it. I'm Native American. Okay, that's your, it's hard to really get at the root of who is this self? Who is this being that's inside of here? But I think that's really where our journey should begin. And I don't think there's you ask that question one day and then you've got it figured out, because we're evolving, we're constantly growing, right? Or at least I hope that we're always growing. So that question should be constantly reflected upon in our state of mindfulness. So we start with mindfulness on this side, and then we're going to jump over to something in the physical realm, and this is what I would call the foundation. So foundational in the physical realm. This is more related to as you're starting your journey of digging into the truths of our world. We've been talking a lot about how to use permaculture, not just as we grow our food, but social permaculture. And Stephen talks about how you design your life, right? So in order to start thinking about how you design your life and to start questioning the various systems around us, you need a foundation. And that foundation, I think a couple recommendations that I would put out there are to learn fallacies, to learn logical fallacies, to start questioning your own thinking and to know what a logical fallacy is and when you find yourself using them. Also to start thinking critically and questioning your own biases, questioning your own presuppositions and looking to these terms, really starting to understand what this means, right? And along with that, something called the trivium. Has anybody ever heard of that? Trivium, grammar, rhetoric, logic. Just starting to implement these ideas into the way you question the world, because it's important to realize that this right here, this space between your skull, is the most important real estate that exists out there, right? I mean, this is a beautiful piece of land and there's beautiful communities around here, but at the end of the day, this is the most important space because everybody is trying to rent space up in here. Whether it's the YouTube videos, it's the commercials before movies, it's me at this moment, everybody's trying to get in your headspace, some for, positive reasons, maybe some for other reasons. And if you, again, are not in a state of mindfulness and not rooted in yourself, then as you start to approach the world and start to question things, it can be very easy to be filled with maybe somebody else's perceptions or to start blindly accepting things as opposed to thinking critically. So that's why I'm saying when it comes to the physical realm, you want to establish a foundation of critical thinking, questioning your own biases, learning logical fallacies, and applying that as you start to question what's around you. And then we're going to hop back over to the spiritual, the emotional realm. So for those who are just joining, we're like making our way up the chakra system of what I call the sevenfold path of the holistic activist or holistic anarchist. And the second step I would call reflection, or what is really, I think, a remembrance of remembering. Who's heard the idea that remembering is really just remembering, putting ourselves back together, right? That idea of putting our members back together. So after you enter a state of mindfulness and starting to question, who am I? What is this body? What is this person, this awareness inside of this physical being? And you start to establish your foundation of critical thinking. You want to start to have that reflection. And that, as I was sharing with just getting locked up and having mindfulness, I started to journal every day. Who here journals, keeps a journal, however periodic? I mean, doesn't that help you just to reflect on your thoughts? I mean, I highly suggest, even if meditation sounds very kind of intimidating to you, take 5 minutes a day in your favorite chair at the end of the day or here in the jungle and just reflect, especially out here. There's so much going on. We're constantly being stimulated by different conversations and music and talks and things. Find some quiet space, spend 5 minutes with yourself to just ask and think, what happened the moment I woke up till the moment you're getting ready to fall asleep, whether that's 6 a.m. listening to Tycho or whatever. You just think about everything that you're going through and you're experiencing, and I promise you, as you do that and as that becomes a regular practice in your daily life, you will start to exhibit that state of reflection just habitually. It'll just be easier instead of constantly reacting to life, what life hands you, and just raging, and just being, again, reactive, the way we talked about activism. You have the ability to go into that state of mindfulness, go into that state of reflection and say, okay, I'm being triggered, I'm feeling a certain kind of way, I'm catching feelings over here, something's going on, this is why, and really to examine your thoughts and ask that question again, who am I, why am I feeling this way? Now we hop back over to the physical realm of education. Now this is, again, learning, reading, writing, educating yourself on the world around you. And I've talked a lot about this. The talk here is about decentralization. One of the areas that the solutions when it comes to this, establishing our foundation of critical thinking, moving up to self-education. We live in the world now where we have so much knowledge about. It's a great resource where you can sign up to take classes that are for free. MIT is putting their courses on the internet. All these universities, we have the ability to start learning and educating ourselves around the world. And again, with a critical thinking mind, where we don't what does truth even mean, right? We're in this time and place now where, as a journalist, the fake news label was heavily thrown at my work and the work of many associates, and that term was then used as a way to demonetize us, to take us off of Google searches, and a number of different things, right? So we're in a really beautiful time, but we're also on the precipice of a very dangerous time. If independent media and independent journalism and independent thinking is taken away and becomes a thing of the past, that's a very dangerous time to be in, where the people who are actively seeking that information only have corporate sources, right? The internet helped us get away from that with this, burgeoning independent media over the last 10 to 15 years, and all these new websites, and some that became legitimate businesses, and breaking stories, and being on the ground level. I was able to go to Ferguson, to Standing Rock, to the Apache Stronghold, and to cover a bunch of different trials related to important things that the mainstream corporate media was completely ignoring or lying about. And it is becoming more and more difficult to do that. So I just want you guys to be aware of that. It's ever important for us to start educating ourselves and to start digging for resources. The other aspect of the fake news thing that I'll mention before I move on is that unfortunately it's got to a point now where if you disagree with somebody, you just label what they're saying fake news. And that's a very dangerous place to be, where each of us can just say, no, I don't agree with you saying, that's fake news. Now I'm going to just stay in my bubble of confirmation bias and just believe what I want to believe. We have to be willing to question ourselves and question our own minds and question our own presuppositions. It's very, very important that we have critical thinking. Now we hop back over to probably one of the most important aspects on the spiritual, emotional side, and this is forgiveness. Forgiveness of self and others. Who here struggles with self-forgiveness? Maybe you've wronged somebody, wronged yourself, or just different things. Hey, what's up, brother? And it's important, right? I mean, I shared a story of, growing up with a father in and out of prison and making promises, and through meditation and through some really deep modalities, I was able to recover some memories of things that I forgot about, like memories of being like 7 years old in a little baseball uniform, waiting on the driveway for him to show up when he got out of prison, and learning he was already back in prison, and just, I buried that somewhere deep, and it came back to me, and I was able to start doing that for, the forgiveness process. And that's absolutely important for us to forgive at our own pace. It's up to you. You're on your own journey. But definitely just know that on the other side of forgiveness is such a release, such a weight lifted off. And I think there's joy there, right? My birth father, he unfortunately did succumb to his addiction, and he died of a drug overdose last summer while I was, touring the US speaking and stuff. And he struggled with this his whole life, from when I was a child till his death. And I'm thankful that I did make the time to come to him and tell him as an adult, to just I don't know that we'll ever have a relationship, but I want you to know I forgive you for everything, and I'm not mad at you. I want you to be happy now. And I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't made time for that. I think it'd be very difficult, even more difficult, to have him pass without having made that time for that. So make time for forgiveness of yourself and others. It's hugely important. Now we get over to the physical realm, and we're talking about taking action. Taking action. So again, I'm very action-oriented, localized, decentralized. How do we implement these ideas? How do we start pulling away from systems that don't align with our values? We're going to get more into that in the next step. But I just want to say, with the take action, don't waste time being afraid or paralyzed or looking for the perfect solution, because none of us have the perfect solution. I've got a lot of ideas that I felt like were worth writing down into books, and there's been plenty of people here exploring various ideas, and even the conversations here are exploring ideas. Together, though, we can come up with new intentions and new systems that I think are actually built around the principles that we care about. So a big part of my message is to not just blindly to continue to support systems and companies and individuals that don't align with your values. And that's very difficult in the world we live in, right? I think most of us understand it in a very simple way. Like, okay, I'm gonna buy clothes that align with my values, that don't destroy the rainforest, or don't, use pesticides and things like that. So you understand the power of your dollar and your currency. But start applying that to everything, right? Like, for example, one of the reasons I love Envision is because they think holistically. How many festivals can you come to where you're going to find all different kinds of recycling and composting, and they're thinking about keeping the jungle alive and remediating it after all of us leave? They're going to stay here to make sure that this jungle can thrive and the animals are not being harmed. That's beautiful, but we don't see that in every area. So I think it's just important to emphasize taking action, and again, thinking holistically about the ways you take action. Start using that holistic self-assessment, that idea of looking at various sectors of your life and asking yourself, are your relationships, be that your relationship with your job, with your significant other, with the government, with various corporations, are those relationships in line with your values and principles? The principles that I hold dear, that I promote, One that is known as the sovereignty of the individual. Again, back to the kind of anarchist idea, the self-ownership, that I think that you each, everybody here at this festival, are powerful, beautiful, free human beings capable of organizing your lives in your own fashion. I don't necessarily have to agree with what you do, what you eat, what you smoke, what you drink, who you date, how you love, but I have no right to force you to do any other. I can just love you as a human being. We can connect, we can have healthy discussion or even debate, or we can agree to disagree. But at the end of the day, you own yourself. And if we all accept that and we give that respect to each of us, the world would just radically change. But most of us kind of hold that ideal, but then once we start looking at the larger systems, it kind of falls away, right? And that's why, again, I just can't support a system like government or corporations, because it's imposed on people. You know, even if you think that its actions are being done for the good, at the end of the day, it's funded by money that's been taken from the people, whether they like it or not. And that's something that I can't vibe with. So I try to always, when I'm taking action, think about how can I opt out of the systems that don't align with my values and principles, whether that's sovereignty of the individual, self-ownership, the 7th generation principle. So again, thinking in terms of multi-generations and only supporting institutions and people who are also doing that. So those are 2 foundational principles that you might want to explore, and you probably have others as you start to think about this journey. Then we get over to back to the emotional side, and we talk about acceptance, recognizing the world as it is, not as you want it. And what I think that's there's a fine line right there, right? Because what I'm talking about is accepting. This is something that my friend the Buddha told me, that, you know, there's a nature, that everything has a nature as it is. And once you come to that place of like a tacit acceptance where you really don't even have to put it into words, you just accept. For example, I accept that there are individuals out there that were manifested into this reality, that the role they're playing is to be the CEO of a company that's leaking oil into the waters, or that somebody manifested into this world to be a CEO of a company, or to be the president of a nation that is causing genocides and all kinds of horrible things that from our subjective perspective, we look at them, we say, that makes me feel wrong, that doesn't feel good. Thank you so much. Give it up for her, all right? You know, and you start to really ask those kinds of questions and look at the world, but again, accept that, okay, there are people whose vibration, whose energy, whose purpose is different than mine on this planet. But at the same time, if they weren't here, if those CEOs and those government officials or those whoever, again, you got this kind of image of the bad guys, the powers that wish they were, if they weren't doing what they were doing, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. There has to be a counterbalance, right? So whether you call that darkness and light, whatever you call it, there's a purpose. So to me, acceptance is about seeing that there is a nature that exists in this world, and there is everything has its nature and serving its purpose. But that doesn't mean blindly accepting and taking no action. It doesn't mean just saying, well, everything is as it is supposed to be, so I don't have to do anything. It just is what it is. I think that is a cop-out in my view, because it's up to us to see things as they are, but also to see that we have a role to play, and that we can actively, again, play a role in changing the world for the coming generations, the 7 generations and beyond. Healing, we're going to talk, we'll go back over to the other side. Localize, focus your efforts and actions locally. Build neighborhood coalitions, councils, whatever it takes. Again, I think that this is where the answers are going to take place, because we're all going home after this event. We're going to different parts of the world. It's cool to connect here, but if each of us are spread out, a couple of people here, a couple of people here, we can't necessarily help each other all the time. But we might have to be the ones that go home to our local communities with that fire in our hearts and get these ideas going, start getting people thinking holistically, start getting to think about what systems don't align with our values and how can I opt out of those systems and then support new systems that actually do align with my values, even if you're going to have to be the one to create it. You know, we have to step out of our comfort zone sometimes and be the leaders in our community. Because, I mean, yeah, we have, what, maybe 7,000 people here, and there's, I don't know, 50 plus in this particular area hearing my voice, maybe some more will hear it online. And so that's just a small fraction of the minds here, right? Other people are focused on different things, getting food, partying, being elsewhere, listening to other talks. We have to be the ones to make the change. I mean, it's kind of cliche at this point, but it's the truth. If we don't step up to the plate and take some kind of action and go home with this fire and seek change in our lives and our local communities, then again, we'll be here at 2020 and talking about the same thing. And it'll be cool. I'll come back and speak again if I get invited. But wouldn't it be awesome if we all came back and we talked about all the change we implemented in the year in between, and then you guys were up here speaking on stage talking about all the amazing projects you did over the year, right? I mean, that sounds cooler to me than coming back and kind of rehashing the same things over and over. Like, let's actually see the change. Let's be the change, and it takes action. It takes getting out from behind just the computer screen. You know, I think that we need to question things like social media, and obviously they're a tool that can be used for good, that can be used for a certain way, but when you come to festivals like this to be seen, to wear a certain kind of fashion, to wear the right costume, to hear the right music, or do you come here to get transformation, to get that healing, to go home again to seek change? I mean, because that's what I came here for, and we've all got different purposes, and that's fine, I accept that. But if we don't want to just become the same old festival culture that I think some of us were trying to get away from when we come towards places like Envision, then we need to question what we're really doing here and what our intentions are, right? And only you can decide what your intentions are and what you'll do with this. Then we get back to the emotional side. We talk about healing, facing your dragon, your shadow, your demons, and of course, loving yourself. Who here struggles with self-love, has struggled with that? It's definitely something I've struggled a lot with throughout my life and still battle that. You know, I think that what I call the internal tyrant is our own doubts, fears, and insecurities. And I don't care who you are, how big you are on Instagram or on Facebook or on social media, everybody's got doubts, fears, and insecurities. They look differently person to person. They express themselves differently because we've all got our own different journeys and our own paths, and some things might affect one person and you see that and you're like, wow, you're so amazing, I can't believe that even bothers you, but it might be completely paralyzing to them, right? So when we start to practice that self-love and facing our shadow, our demons, our triggers, and some of the things that set us off, and we start to heal that, and coming from a place of love again, like not shaming yourself or attacking yourself. I used to have a very negative self-talk conversation going on for years. I was writing music. I mean, I look back now and I realize, like, holy crap, I was just straight up programming myself to like take this in. I had like one song when I was like in 7th grade that was literally, the lyrics were just, I hate myself, I want to die, like over and over for like 7 minutes. And I wonder later, I'm like, oh, I wonder why I was feeling so crappy. But I was just lost in this kind of cycle, and like that self-talk was there. And it literally took for me to, one day after just being so sick of suspecting each of you of trying to screw me over, or thinking that you were, you know, just out to get me, because that's just what I grew up thinking the world was. People lie, they say whatever they want, and then they do whatever they want, and that's just how things work. I had to grab a hold of that and stop and say, thank you, but no thank you. You no longer serve a purpose. Like, you may have served a purpose at some point, but I'm like reclaiming this headspace, and to start that conversation over. So when you find yourself recognizing your faults or your flaws, you know, don't be harsh on yourself. That's a part of your struggles, are a part of your journey towards self-actualization, self-enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, and our collective journey as well. Your struggles are a part of that, so don't shy away from the struggles and from the darkness, right? It's, you know, sometimes people think that being spiritual is just the blissed out moments when you're meditating, you feel real great, or you're having these beautiful days where the sun's shining and the moon's out there and you can just feel all connected to the elements. That's part of your journey, but also is like waking up, stubbing your toe, losing money, being late to work, all those things. It's all a part of the journey. Those days when you're frustrated and you're just like, oh my God, what the... That's part of your journey too. Love it, enjoy it. And I request that next time you're in that moment, whether it's frustrating or positive, just stop and say this to yourself. This is a kind of a mantra that's helpful to me sometimes. So this is what it's like to be alive. Just say that with me.
This is what it's like to be alive.
That's right. Every part of your journey is a part of that healing, right? So you're frustrated, you're down, just say that to yourself. So this is what it's like to be alive. Like, just feel it. Don't run away from it. Then, all right, we got about, I'm going to start wrapping up here. We're going to move faster. Back to the physical side. Again, what I call harmonizing. And what I mean by harmonizing is to align, once again, thoughts, words, and actions. So your thoughts are, I don't want to support the systems. I want to support the positive things. I don't want to support those who are doing destruction. I want to support those who are doing creation. And that's your thoughts. You speak it out loud, but do your actions align with that? That's where you start to harmonize thoughts, words, and actions. And we do that, or at least I think one way to do that is, again, to opt out of the systems that don't align with your values. I haven't used a bank in 10 years. I haven't paid taxes since 2011. I stopped using social media over the last year, at least those mainstream systems that steal our data, that sell it for all kinds of money, that spy on us, that don't give a damn about you. Instead, I support decentralized social media like Minds.com or Steemit or other alternative platforms that actually are decentralized and don't spy on you and don't sell your info. So I try to align all these different areas of my life because basically it doesn't feel good in my heart at this point to like support things that don't that don't have the same goals as I do. And it's very difficult in the world we're in, but it's possible. And it starts with small steps, right? Maybe you're so sick of being dependent on the grocery system because it's unsustainable and involves shipping food thousands of miles around the country, and the companies that are there are not that great. So you start by going to the farmer's market once a week and supporting your local grower. Then you find an hour of your weekend to volunteer at a community garden, right? And that's your first steps. And before you know it, you come home with a little bit of greens, you got some farmer's market food, and so you feel good because you're supporting local farmers, you know where it came from, there's no pesticides on it, and you notice, hey, I saved like $5 out of my grocery bill this week because I'm going to the community garden. And that's the first steps. And then it starts, and then before you know it, you're at Punta Mona hanging out with Stephen Brooks and eating jackfruit that's falling off the trees and star fruit and all these amazing things. But it starts with those first steps. We have to be willing to take those first steps. Who here is willing to take first steps when they go home? Yeah, we're going to change the world, aren't we? We're going to change ourselves, we're going to change our communities, we're going to come back to Envision 2020, and we're going to share it with each other. We're going to get all of you guys up here to share your stories and tell us how you change things in your own communities. That's what we need, right? Harmonizing our actions. And then we get to the acceptance, the healing, and the empowerment. Doing the things, having the relationships that uplift us and connect us. As Stephen says, designing your life in a way that produces this abundance and this empowerment. He really just got in my head the other day, brother. So much gratitude for you, brother. Talking about how we design our lives and how if you want to be closest, for example, close to your friends and close to the food that you care about, then why would you design your life in a way where your friends are 2 towns over or 3 hours away, or you only see them once a year, right? Start thinking in terms of permaculture where you have zone 1, 2, 3, and 4. Zone 1 are the plants that you have to tend to every day, right? So maybe you have your zone 1 friendships and relationships that you want to be connected to every day, right? So why are your zone 1 friends in zone 4 right now, right? Why are we designing our lives or allowing other people to design our lives for us in ways that don't align with our values? Think about that, because we are the creators. We are the designers of our lives if we choose to be. We have to take the reins and say, I'm going to be the one in control of my life. I'm going to actualize my goals. I'm not going to hand that over to somebody else. And then we get to 6, we're on the last couple steps here, we're back on the physical side of things. Community, community, community. Obviously such an important theme. Now I want to suggest you guys checking out one website, it's called freedomcells.org. It's a social network that I helped build. It's a website that allows you to go on here, you can create an account. Now it's not like any other social network where you post pictures of your foods and your cats and your memes and things like that. You can if you want, but you create a profile of your interest, of your skills. You can search for other people's interests, other people's skills, and you can search 5 miles, 10 miles, and 50 miles, and it'll show you a map and show you people who are local to you to build cells or circles, what I call freedom cells, which are just decentralized peer-to-peer groups of people coming together for mutual aid, for building community gardens, for unplugging, and for harmonizing our values, right? And the idea is that if we each start building these cells or these circles locally, and then as they grow, interconnecting nationally and internationally, we're going to create a parallel network that actually does align with our values. So we don't have to overthrow the bad guys. We don't have to vote them out. We build something better. All right. And then on the other side, we get to step 7 of the spiritual, emotional side, and this is what I call actualization. Now, self-actualization, again, like the idea of enlightenment, I don't even know if that's possible, right? I think that maybe we experience these brief moments of, again, like everything's just harmonized, you're nowhere else, you're so present in the moment, you're feeling that joy in your heart or wherever you're at, and you feel like your entire being glowing, and you have that moment of actualization. And in the next minute, you stub your toe again, and you're back to reality, right? But you had it for a moment. So I don't know if it's a state that we can attain and be in bliss forever, but I think that it's a place to work towards. So do we ever attain actualization or enlightenment, or is it just brief moments? I'm not sure the answer, but I know that if we set ourselves this goal, we can get to a better place than where we are now, right? We give ourselves that goal to be the best version of ourselves. And on the other side, number 7 of the chakra point on the physical side, we have liberation. And again, is it possible to ever be truly, completely liberated in a place where we have a sustainable life and all of our food's coming from sustainable regenerative systems, and we're not being restricted by corporations or by governments or by just, violent people in general? Is that possible? I don't know, but I know that I'm aiming for it and I'm working towards that. My last couple points I want to mention is that because of inspiration from Stephen and others, my goal has been for the last couple years to launch an intentional community by 2020, 2021, and to build around these principles that I've just outlined for you. My books go much further into them. They're all available for free on the internet if you want to check them out. And if you're interested in talking about ideas of community, I'm in the United States currently, but I'll be out of there by the end of this year. I'm looking for other places to build and to connect, to put these ideas into action. I don't know what that'll look like, but I want to connect with you. I want to collaborate. I want us to come together and find a way towards actualization and towards liberation and towards holistic activism and towards living a life in line with our values. Because I think when we combine both of these areas, we get to a place where we are living our truths, where our thoughts, words, and actions are truly aligned. I appreciate you guys' time so very much. I'm going to end the way that I always do. If you've heard me speak before, then you know what this is all about. This is an affirmation that I used when I was grabbing that headspace back and getting in control of my own mind, and I still use it from time to time when it's needed. So I hope that you will borrow it and take it as you feel. And it's what's on my shirt here. So if you feel inclined, you can repeat after me. And I really would love to just hear you and feel you. Let everybody hear us out here in this jungle. If you can hear my voice. Again, thank you for your time. My name is Derrick Broze. If you feel like repeating, let's do this together. I am powerful.
I am powerful.
I am beautiful.
I am beautiful.
I am free.
I am free.
Thank you guys for your time.
Yeah, no, keep that going. Keep that going for Derrick Broze, everybody. Come on, lift them up. Lift them up. Everything this brother says resonates with me so deeply, and that is so beautiful and rare. So thank you for speaking my heart that I didn't know I wanted to say. So I appreciate learning that from you, man.